Okay, I'm gonna make the announcements. Nathan is not here today usually. So,
I see him true.
I saw him.
He wasn't true?
He was an early minute. He was leaving when I first came. Okay, learning announcements. Year of Learning, sponsored by Ilya and Boris Kagan to commemorate the Yahrzeit of the fourth of Adam, his father, Isabet Motto, and a day of learning sponsored by Norman Beckoff to commemorate the Yahrzeit of his aunt, Dorothy Woolner, Devorah Bat Shmuel, on the 7th of Shvat, the Shamash have an Aliyah. Don't forget, we have some things coming up. We're having the great egg cook-off on President's Day. Steve Kern and I are gonna go head-to-head and see who makes the best eggs. And we'll also have it accompanied by a Shiur by Rabbi Marcus. So if you're interested, sign up. You got the email. Okay.
Okay, good morning. A very small crew this morning, both online and in the shul, but all right. It's quality that counts. So Kiddush Levana is a fascinating practice. I remember, it sticks out in my mind, must be 45 years ago, across the street, when the shul was still in Rabbi Yuden's house, and we were being Mekadesh to Levana, and Chaviva was 4 or 5 years old at the time, something like that, and she stands outside in all her innocence, and she says, "There's the Levana, where's the Kiddush?" Great line, sticks in my mind after all these years. But Kiddush does not necessarily mean Kiddush in the colloquial sense. Kiddush is sanctification. And the Kiddush that we make on Shabbos morning, it begins with a sanctification blessing. Okay. The Levana is a very important part of Judaism because our calendar is primarily a lunar calendar. There's some solar aspects to it, but it's primarily a lunar calendar. And in the days gone by, the minute that somebody would see the moon crescent in the sky, they would go to Bezdin, Yerushalayim, and the Sanhedrin would question them and quiz them, and there'd be all types of physical models of the moon. Did it look like this? Did it look like that? And once they can ascertain that the moon itself did appear, then they would proclaim the new month, and they would send messengers out so you'd know when holidays would be. You know when to fast on Yom Kippur, when you know not to eat chametz on Pesach. These are very important things. Over time, the proclamation of the new moon was, I guess, lessened when the Sanhedrin no longer existed, and it wasn't until the 2nd century, Hillel Hasheni, who was a brilliant, I guess you'd call him a mathematician / astrologer, or astronomer rather, mathematician and astronomer, and he put together the calendar in the 2nd century, and that calendar is still a calendar that we use today. And we can predict exactly when, in 75 years from now, Tu B'Shvat's going to occur, what day. I mean, it was very, very precise. And one of the most difficult sections of halacha to study is the Rambam's Kiddush HaChodesh, because it's very complicated to know exactly where the position of the moon is in the sky and so forth and so on. So the proclamation of the moon was standardized, and we have a calendar. Nevertheless, we still are Mekadesh, or Mekadesh the Levana. We sanctify the new moon because we recognize that our calendar, even today, is based on the Levana. And the question is, at what point do we acknowledge the beginning of the new month? How late do we have to do this? If it's a cloudy day, you don't see it. We know when it's going to be because we have a calendar. But even so, even though we have the fixed calendar, nevertheless, we still go out and we sanctify this new moon to remember the process that used to take place when you had a Sanhedrin functioning. We recite, and there's a bracha, and there's a whole ritual, tefillos that were added, and the brachos, and the shalom aleichem, and all those things. There's a lot of interesting historical background to that. The Gemara says that we can recite Birkas HaChodesh, or the Kiddush Levana, actually, until the shape of the moon becomes fulfilled. How long does that take? When does it take? Is it the 7th of the month, the 16th of the month, the 11th of the month? There's a lot of discussion as to when this takes place. Generally, we are allowed to be Makadesh Levana up until, I would guess, the middle, almost the middle of the month. Generally, we try to do it before the 11th or 12th of the month, early on. You can be Makadesh Levana within 3 days after it first appears. And we try to do it within that time span. An interesting question was raised. Why don't we make a bracha of a hatov v'hametiv? When obviously the moon appearing is a good thing. It tells us when our festivals are going to be. So we don't make a bracha of hatov v'hametiv. For the same reason, we don't say the bracha of Dayan ha'emes when the moon disappears. So it's a natural event which we acknowledge. I would put it that way. Rabbi Yochanan puts tremendous importance on this event, that if you cite a bracha on the appearance of the moon, it's similar to somebody who is makabel penei hashchina, which makes it a rather important event. And people shouldn't rush out of shul when we do it. We'll come back to why we do it on Motzei Shabbos. But we receive the Shechina once a month, according to the Gemara. And Abaye observes that since the appearance of the moon, as if we're accepting Hashem's presence in the world to determine our Chagim, it's a form of Kedusha, which is recited standing, and also with a minyan whenever possible. Now, if you're not in shul and it's cloudy, and the next day it appears and you're in your backyard, you can say Kiddush Levana by yourself, but it's preferable to do it with a minyan. Interesting, there's a whole discussion about the role of women in Kiddush Levana. Do women have an obligation to recite Kiddush Levana? Usually you see all the men outside. Do we ever see a group of women being Makadesh Levana? It's interesting. On the one hand, it's a Birkas Re'iyah, a brach that you see, like if you see a shooting star, if you see a comet, when you see a big ocean or a mountain range, you make brachas. It's called Birkas Re'iyah. So when you see the moon in its first appearance, you'd make this bracha. On the other hand, is it something that might be a mitzvah saseh shezman grama, that women are exempt from? That discussion takes place. And there's also a separate discussion, aside from women being exempt from general mitzvah saseh shezman grama, the Magen Avram says that women can voluntarily recite the bracha on a mitzvah saseh shezman grama. Even though you're exempt, that doesn't mean you don't have a schar mitzvah for doing it. So women can make the bracha on it. On the other hand, some people say that women perhaps ought not to do that because of the fact that at one time, and this is an historical development which applies to many, many mitzvahs, women until recently, generally did not get a Jewish education which allowed them to read Hebrew. Most women, many women, up until the modern era, were not learned in the sense of even davening. You have a lot of what they call tchinos, Yiddish prayer books, Yiddish books which allow women to pray in their native language, so to speak. In many shuls in Europe, throughout the Middle Ages up until probably the early 20th century, in many places, you had a woman in shul known as a zagrika. She was a woman who unusually, she knew how to read Hebrew, and she was like the shliach tzibor in the women's section. And she would lead davening for the women who, again, for whatever reason, sociologically, did not get an education. And since they didn't learn how to read Hebrew, there were many mitzvahs that they didn't perform. And Kiddush Levana may have been one of those mitzvahs. So the Magen Avram brings this down. Other poskim hold that Kiddush Levana is not a mitzvah saseh zman grama, and because it's not contingent on a specific time, but rather the appearance of the moon itself. Okay, and I won't get the details of the machlokes about women making the bracha al Kiddush Levana, but clearly it was something that wasn't done in earlier times, and even today it's unusual to see women gathering together to do Kiddush Levana. There's no reason why they shouldn't, but I don't know of any group of women that ever gets together to do this mitzvah. I've never seen it, and generally you don't see women being the Kaddish Levana. There's even there's a medrash that talks about Chava, because of the sin with Adam Harishon, so she was somehow involved in the diminution of the size of the moon, according to the Midrashim. And that's a whole separate discussion there. All right. What about the notion of it being a mitzvah saseh zman grama? So it's really not a mitzvah saseh zman grama. There's no mitzvah to actually go out and see the moon. Chazon Ish differed, but if you do see the moon, that's when you go out. But do you have to go out and look for the moon? And there's a whole machlokes about that as well. Is it obligatory or situational? It's a fascinating discussion. Obligatory means we have to go and do it, or situational if you happen to see it. And there's a discussion among the poskim about that. A lot of fascinating responsa on this. The NATEP Yehuda talks about a case of in the month of Adar. The new month of Adar was very cloudy. And it's now the middle of the month. It's Purim. They're landing the Megillah. And the moon appears. And they can see it. Do you stop the landing of the Megillah and go out and do Kiddush Levana? And the NATEP Yehuda says that if you don't go out, it might get cloudy again, you stop the Megillah and you go out and do Kiddush Levana. That's a tshuva of NATEP Yehuda. The Netziv goes one step further. The Netziv is later, it's the 19th century. And Motzoi Shabbos. Do you make Havdalah first? Or do you go out and be Mekadesh Levana first? Because it might be cloudy. You might not have an opportunity. And it's a fascinating discussion. So he says that you make it after Havdalah. Because there's no mitzvah, according to the Netziv, there's no mitzvah to recite, no independent mitzvah to recite Kiddush Levana, because it doesn't apply in the shul. It only applies when you go outside and you see the Levana. So that's a fascinating discussion at that. He would disagree with the NATEP Yehuda about interrupting Megillah to go out and be Mekadesh Levana. There's no obligation until you actually see the moon. So if you're inside and you don't see the moon, you don't have an obligation. Once you go outside and see the moon, that's when the obligation kicks in. Yeah. Okay, good question. If you have a skylight or not a skylight, a window. You're in your house. Saturday night, it was cloudy. There was no Kiddush Levana in shul. Right? Someone comes back inside and says there's no Levana. So we don't do Kiddush Levana. But later on, you go home and you're walking by your window and all of a sudden you see the Levana. Do you have to go outside? Or could you do Kiddush Levana inside looking through the window? Or a skylight, as the case may be. Preferably to go outside. But if you see the Levana and it might be cloudy again, there wouldn't be a problem of doing that. But it's preferable to be done outside. A lot of discussion is how late in the month can you recite Kiddush Levana? And there are different opinions. You could probably go halfway into the month, up to the 16th, to recite, according to the Gemara anyway. The Shulchan Aruch says, agrees with that 16 days from the Molad, from the first appearance, because that's half of the lunar cycle, according to the Ramah. Sorry? Usually 3 days. When after the third day, the shape of the moon is much more pronounced and visible, and that's when you can do it. So after the third day. Why do we do it on Motzei Shabbos? Why do we wait? So there's a couple of reasons. Number one, famous expression, Barov Am Hadras Melech, right? When there's a congregation of people, it's more, there's more significance, more Kedusha accepted to it. Also the fact that we're all still dressed in our Shabbos clothes and together with the minyan, and it's a whole, it feeds into the spirit of Shabbos as well. Is it better to wait until Motzei Shabbos or do it during the week? Now, if you're worried that it might be cloudy, then do it earlier and don't wait. But if Motzei Shabbos is early in the month and you have a few days leeway, so to speak, then you don't necessarily, you should wait until Motzei Shabbos when everybody is together. You don't recite Kiddush Levana on Yontif, according to the Ramah. And you don't recite it on Shabbos either, except, according to the Mishnah Berurah, if it's the last night to recite Kiddush Levana, then you can do it even on Shabbos, which is an unusual heter of the Mishnah Berurah. And how cloudy does it have to be? Can you, if you see the moon through the clouds, can you make Kiddush Levana? Interesting discussion there as well. You shouldn't do it under a roof, preferably not indoors. There's a fascinating discussion. Which direction do you face when you're doing Kiddush Levana? You obviously need to see that Levana is up there, but standing and facing the Levana while you're doing all these prayers looks almost like you're worshiping the moon. So you really, and the fact that we say a Kaddish afterwards, we say Oleinu, so you should turn to Mizrach, at least, when you're actually reciting the prayers of Kiddush Levana. But you don't want to appear as if if you're engaged in moon worship. And Rav Moshe Sternbuch writes that very similar to Bowie V'Shalom, in the Chadodi, we should face towards the west, as if we were Makabel Pnei Shechina, which we mentioned earlier. The Nusach HaTfilos, it grew up over a period of time, saying Shalom Aleichem, and you can say it to the same. Do you say Shalom Aleichem to the same person 3 times or 3 different people? That's also a discussion. Siman Tov or Mazel Tov. This whole business of dancing after Kiddush Levana, Tovim mi'oro shabara lokenu, there are a lot of interesting things. Wishing each other a mazel tov. Kiddush Levana is in fact a type of simcha. And therefore, what do you do with a simcha? You dance. And the Ramah actually says that. He says, Lachein osin smachos urikudim b'kiddush hachodesh dugmas simchas tesuah. He compares it to a wedding. It's a simcha. So what do you do with a simcha? You dance. So therefore, after we finish Kiddush Levana, the minhag is Ashkenaz at least to dance. So what we see is an historical development. At one time, witnesses ran to Yerushalayim, the Sanhedrin investigated and proclaimed a new moon because it was important for our calendar. Once you have a calendar in place by the 2nd century, you no longer need witnesses to come to Yerushalayim and be examined. And the examination process, by the way, was fascinating. They had visual aids. They had different shapes of the moon hanging from strings. Did it look like this? Did it look like that? Was it over there? Was it here? Fascinating discussion in the Gemara Rosh Hashanah. But from that developed the whole practice of the Jewish community as a community going out, being Mekabel Pnei Ashkina, as it were, each month to acknowledge the fact that it's a new moon, a new cycle, and our calendar is based on that. Even though technically we don't need it anymore, nevertheless, the cycle renews itself every month. And Tile halachos emerged from this. How early do you say it? How late do you say it? And the prayers evolved over a period of time to what we have now. The question still remains about the women's participation in Kiddush Levana. It has not, to my satisfaction, been resolved. You generally don't find women engaged in Kiddush Levana. I don't know why. The machlokes is whether or not it's considered a mitzvah saseh shezman drama. And even though women may be exempt from many mitzvah saseh shezman drama, in many cases, women accept upon themselves to do these mitzvahs. Like eating in a sukkah, for example. Women don't have to eat in the sukkah. But in most families, the women do. I mean, there are families, I guess, in some communities where the men are the only ones that go out to the sukkah, the women eat inside. That's probably because the sukkah wasn't big enough to hold everybody. That's a practical reason. But generally speaking, now we have these fancy sukkahs and everybody sits outside together. Women accept upon themselves. There are many, many other mitzvahs, I say, shazman groma, that women have accepted. So that still remains an open question. I do not recall ever seeing, unless somebody can correct me, women going out and being Makadesh Levana every month. I have never seen that. I don't know if women's minyanim, I'm not that familiar with women's minyanim, I don't know if the women's minyanim actually do that or not. I don't know, but there's no reason why they shouldn't. Anyhow, I wish you all a great Chodesh, and we're coming up to Tu B'Shvat, which is the middle of the month, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that next week. Okay. Any other questions, comments, criticisms? Okay.
Wally,
Yes.
and since the men usually do it in shul, Motzei Shabbos, and women are not in shul then, so they don't do it. And then during the week, it's like out of sight, out of mind.
Perhaps. Okay, that could be a good reason why women don't do it, because they're not in shul Saturday night. Okay, I can see that. But even if you're not in shul, you still have an obligation to be Mekadesh Levana. So if it's cloudy on Saturday night, and somebody comes in and says there's no Levana, so you look for it the rest of the week. So that could apply to men or to women. I just don't recall ever seeing women engaged in this process. I don't know why. I wonder, I don't know, maybe, huh? No mechitza. Oh, but they're not in shul. I don't know, Dina, in camp, do the girls, are the girls involved in Kiddush Levana in camp? You recall ever seeing that? I don't recall seeing that either. Yeah, I don't see that. All right. It's an interesting question to pursue. The role of women in Kiddush Levana. Fascinating. Anything else? Okay, have a great day out there. Stay warm. See you tomorrow, next week.
Take care, Wally.
Take care, Howie. Okay, we have a bench. Do we have a zooming? Yep. We have a zooming, okay. Okay. Levi, a bench for us? Yishem and Baruch Me'atov Yadolam. Baruch Shkam Shlot V'Chayinu. Active Lakol, Mechin Matzon Yosef Asher Baruch V'Chaton. Amen. Amen.